Ladies and gentlemen, Happy New Year, and welcome to our first Net Impact Bangkok Professional Chapter meeting of the year. We're keeping to the third Thursday of the month, so mark your calendars. We don't do the meeting in April, and that's the only one of the year that we don't do due to Songkran holiday. But all others, every third Thursday, okay? Today, for our first visiting speaker of the year, very delighted to welcome Dr. John Paulson, environmental expert and consultant. Actually, John's been coming to our meetings for years, right? A lot, for years, but I haven't seen you in a little while. So very happy to welcome him back. John's a CSR Natural Resources Management Specialist with extensive experience from South and Southeast Asia. His work transcends numerous extractive sectors, including mining, forest, plantations, and oil and gas. John is dedicated to ensuring that business maximizes its benefits to society while minimizing adverse negative environmental and social impact. His experience also includes extensive research and policy work on sustainable management of protected areas and World Heritage sites, enhancing the well-being of local indigenous communities, as well as environmental recovery from natural disasters. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. John Paulson.
Thank you. John. Yeah, it's good. Thank you. I would like first to say thank you to Kunning, Alex, Kunpre, Rachida for making this possible. What I'd like to do is there will not be any sort of technical issues related to these extractive sectors, but I'll try to focus on a few issues which I think are really critical for reaching or enhancing sustainability of any of these sectors. And I'll try to keep the presentation really short, and then hopefully we can have some dialogue, and also feel free to interrupt or while I'm talking. So, for any of these sectors, there are a few trends which I think are important to acknowledge, and hence the importance of enhancing the sustainability. I've outlined a few of them here. And I think it's important that it's not just a constraint, but that indeed the increasing pressure on these resources and the importance of the sectors for the economic development of many of these countries also poses an opportunity, because they often affect vast areas, very tightly linked to infrastructure, and so these extractive sectors also have a huge opportunity to affect large parts of society if they're designed more sustainable. More sustainable. And I think one of the key issues at any project of an extractive resource is whose interests weigh highest at the local level, at the regional level, at the national level, and that means that it's really important to have a hierarchical set of priorities, both in space and over time. And we often when talking about sustainability, we often think long term, but for many of these organizations and companies, the long-term sustainability is of course important, but there also needs to be some short-term economic benefits, because otherwise, in the meantime, they might go bankrupt. So there needs to be maybe an increased focus on the short-term improvements and benefits. So, slightly academically, we're talking about multiple scales of sustainability, both in space. For example, at the national, for a project, what is the contribution to the national economy of the project, not just to the local. And then we need to understand the contribution and effect of the project at these various scales. And in terms of the temporal, when we take a life cycle approach, taking the life cycle approach is a way to take into account the temporal aspects. And then we also need to acknowledge that there are we need to understand the trade-offs amongst these maybe better than we've done in the past, and to make decisions about, to make compromises and to decide which values are most important, or whose interests weigh highest at what time. I think for many companies, it is this balance between the social, the economic, and the environmental concerns that are really important. And so obviously maximizing the efficiency of the operations, hence profitability, while also minimizing the adverse and offsite social, ecological, and environmental impacts. And maybe that has been underestimated or not valued highly enough, to maximize the social benefits to local communities and the environment upon which these local communities depend. And I will later talk about risks and how this is relevant to reducing the risks to the corporation or company. Probably well known that these are some of the key issues: human rights in the case of mining, oil and gas in many cases. These are very sensitive issues. The issue of land acquisition is a huge one, and increasingly probably will be. The issue of land grabbing is one of these big issues that are being discussed all the time. In terms of the laws and regulations underpinning each of these, I think it's fair to say that there's still a lot of ambiguity and lack of clarity in some countries. For example, Indonesia, where the land acquisition laws are continuously being worked on, because the country acknowledges that it depends entirely on, for its economic development, it depends largely on these natural resources. And so the laws to underpin how they can take over land and how they should compensate the local communities are continuously evolving. From an investment, all of these projects generally depend on very large sums of money being invested, and often with many years of with a lag of many years before the returns upon that investment are reached. So the question, I think, which probably everybody would like to know, is whether sustainability does sustainability affect the investment climate? I don't have an answer, but I think it's if the demand for some of these resources is so huge, does it really matter if the extraction is unsustainable, depending on who the investor is? And so there are obviously many factors affecting the likelihood for receiving these large investments, and the role of the broader stakeholder values, including the local communities, are perhaps not appreciated sufficiently in many cases, because decision making is often perhaps not as transparent as it ideally should be. But it's also important that, for example, in the forestry, in the mining business, there are also external factors affecting the likelihood of receiving funds. For example, if some of the dominant companies are perceived as being bad performers, that can affect the sector as a whole. We see that in Indonesia, for example. Now, I was speaking earlier to one regarding the Ifc Performance Standards. I was speaking to one of you about the Ifc Performance Standards that are often used as the target to which the project should adhere, from both the social and the environmental perspectives. So these are widely used, but often perhaps difficult to implement, and the interpretation of them is not as clear as they perhaps should be. National legislation, the business development of business systems that are designed according to the Equator Principles and the Ifc Performance Standards is a very effective way to ensure that the company and the operation is run in a more sustainable manner. This is extremely costly if you're talking about a medium, large-sized company, and takes a long time to develop. But if implemented properly, it is an extremely effective way of ensuring improved sustainability. Now, in many of the, as I mentioned earlier, stakeholder engagement is a really important. It's really important in many of these extractive sector projects, because they often affect local communities, and how do you balance off the values and needs of the local communities with the needs of the company. But I think often, at least based on my experience, both communications from the company to the stakeholders and communication from stakeholders to the company, and that entire stakeholder engagement is seen as a risk rather than as an opportunity, because maybe because of distrust between company and stakeholders, and so often they are very tightly managed. This communication, this bilateral communication, is often very tightly managed to ensure that the corporate messages are very clear and understood by the stakeholders. And there seems, again based on my experience, there seems to be a tendency to avoid or hide sensitive issues rather than address such issues head on. Often these corporate messages or Q&As that you find on the internet are so politically correct that the value of these becomes much less and much less constructive than they could be. And I think the development of a communication strategy that very clearly identifies these various target audiences and stakeholders is a really useful way to manage and to design your stakeholder engagement. But I think often it's not done. Now, as in, and some of these issues are probably applied to any sector, but I think they're particularly important in the extractive sector. And so if you were to, I think within many of the extractive sector companies, there's a real, there's a lack of many of these issues which are important if you were to change, if you are to engage in a change management process towards more sustainable management. Particularly perhaps this, to create room for asking provocative questions and embracing disagreement. If you are to, in some of my past work, I was doing some work with plantation companies, and we were interested in the role of the economic importance of the remaining natural forest patches in the plantation landscape. And we found that by putting people from different departments within the company together, we realized that there was an enormous disagreement amongst the people from the different departments. The pests and disease people thought that natural forests in the landscape would be effectively vectors for pests and diseases affecting the plantations. The fire management people would see it differently, and in fact it turns out that some of these natural forest patches are effective fire breaks in the landscape. And so gradually, by discussing this, you could start to put economic value, maybe not in a quantitative sense, but in a qualitative sense. And so to break up these pillars within the company is I think, really important. Yes, so it's the role of corporate social responsibility in the extractive sectors has in the past largely been seen as these community development projects, and have often been sort of put on the side that we will support the development of healthcare and schools and so on, which provide some benefits to these communities in the which provide benefits to these local communities. But I think the value of corporate social responsibility as a risk avoidance or risk mitigation approach is perhaps not as has not been applied as much as it should be, to appreciate that by engaging with the local communities and satisfying their needs can become a very effective risk mitigation approach. So corporate social responsibility, if performed properly, can become a buffer against local instability or instabilities. These local instabilities with respect to the communities, they can often pose major corporate risk, both at the operational level in terms of its effect on investments, bad publicity, and so on. Finally, the role of research is perhaps not as appreciated either. Cost and benefit analyses at multiple scales of the operation. System dynamics can be used to build common understanding and vision both within the organization and with external stakeholders. And that is increasingly being done as well. I think that is okay. Yep. Any comments, questions?
Sorry. There's still some feedback. Could you give an example of a CSR project that was successful within the extractive industries that you've consulted with?
I think any effort to, I think both within the mining sector, the forestry and plantation industry, you have cases where some of these big companies have built health centers and schools, of course provided jobs, which is really not a community development project, but it's one of these other very important contributions that the companies play or give to the local communities. What often unfortunately happens is that the labor skills required are often so high that the local communities simply don't have the capacity, and so often you have a large influx of migrant labor in the plantation industry, in the mining business, and that creates another set of social problems, the prostitution, but that of course increases the importance of the community development projects to try to compensate for those adverse impacts of the migrant workforce. So capacity building programs in schools.
Hello, my name is David Hanaway. I'm from Oregon State University, but in China for most of this year on a teaching project related to grassland management. And it's not exactly, or should not be, an extractive industry, but it is very much applied in that mode in the sense of removing it rather than sustaining it, or degrading it rather than improving it. And I'm wondering, with your experience in Indonesia, how you would suggest being effective in various countries with programs that would be useful but aren't being asked for. And you mentioned the concept of finding the balance. And in China, there's a lot of talk about the balance between or among political, social, environmental, but it's all driven by economics now. Right. And so it's all nonsense, really. And so I'm wondering what recommendations you might have, and the other issue is how do you stay positive with all of that?
With respect to the, sorry, maybe I can just clarify. You're saying in China that the economics
is the driver, yes.
The driver, right. But is it because we have not yet been good enough at putting an economic value on the negative impacts, or on the...
Yes. Except what's happening today in Beijing is
the cost of pollution. Yeah.
And that may drive some thinking change.
But we don't really know. I mean, I guess the question then would be, what is the economic cost of the pollution?
And how do you have that conversation?
Yeah, I know. But, I think without that, even it doesn't necessarily have to be a quantitative economic value, but at least if you can, in the context of, for example, plantations, the plantation management, I think it's important to challenge the management of the risks of conventional ways of managing the landscape, for example. What is, when you talk about the value of remaining natural forest, what is the value in terms of pesticide dynamics? What is the role of, what is the economic risk of in terms of fire management, windbreak functions, which in the US is very well covered. In the Midwest, basically the opposite. You have what is, in the US, you have put value on windbreaks. To start asking these questions, that to challenge managers in terms of the economic risks, I think is important.
Thank you, John. I have two questions. One is, can you give an explanation a little bit on the business systems that you mentioned? Like what kind of things go into the framework, and who's involved in that, and how do they implement that? And the second question is in terms of the corruption, or not the corruption, but the vague laws in the country. For example, Indonesia are like conflicting laws and regulations. Do the mining companies or energy companies get together and say, okay, we have the same issues with these vague laws, what can we do to deal with the government and to make it fair for all sides? Thank you.
I guess with respect to the second question, sometimes not to have clear laws is also a policy, I suppose. There's obviously a lot of lobbyism going on between the private sector and the government. That's quite clear. in most of the sectors, because they're just really influential.
But do they do it individually, or do they ever do it together? The lobbying
I think within the mining industry, for example, I don't think there's a lot of coordination. I think that's driven a lot by individual family heads, basically. In the forestry sector, I think it's a lot better. I think that, the forestry associations, I think they're doing a lot better in Indonesia. With respect to the first question, I think it depends on the company, how they develop these business systems. They can, some companies simply hire big companies like Ernst & Young to develop the actual nitty-gritty of the business systems. And then subsequently try to build the pillars, and then subsequently find the linkages between the business, the individual business systems, and that's the way this whole issue of corporate social responsibility would be a cross-cutting business system. But of course, it is a huge opportunity also for the company to build some integrated management and maybe break down some of these departmental pillars.
I came a bit late, so I missed all your stuff, but I'm not sure what I have to ask fits exactly. But I regard China as a corporation that's kind of run like that, basically. There's not much scope for anything else. So I was wondering what your opinion is about what's going on in their claim to regarding land grabbing, this is sea grabbing in the South China Sea in its entirety, when all these other neighbouring countries, given that this is going to be an extractive industry of the oil and gas, presumably, have you got any take how these other countries can deal with that? And
maybe not bilaterally, presumably they have to do it in an ASEAN context, or
there is the international law of the sea, but nobody seems to be applying that in this case.
No, I don't really have any answer. Except for preaching what they should be doing. But again, what is the risk to China if they do it the way they want to do it? If there are no real substantial risks, then you can't really stop them.
Surely there are in the international sort of view now, the way geopolitics works and instant communication and how everybody is so interdependent. I mean, America is not happy with China doing this and that. If they start grabbing chunks of ocean, like the Russian is in the Arctic Circle and all that.
Yeah, I don't.
That it? No more questions? Okay, good. I'm Alex Navro. Nick and I used to call ourselves Ab and Sub, the normal twins, but now we have a third member of our team, Compress, sitting over there, and she now does all the work, and all Nick and I do is stand up here and look pretty from time to time. But we're really happy to see such a good turnout here for our first meeting of the year. We'll hope that you'll continue to come. As Nick suggests, please mark it on your calendar. It's the third Thursday. We will have a meeting. And thanks to Pratt, we can tell you 6 months in advance what the topic will be. Let us not confuse you. Let us just say that next time will be 21 February. And we'll be hearing from David Lyman, who is the Chief Values Officer of Tilley & Gibbons. And he's got a lot to say about how values should be driving business, much more than pure profit alone. He's not, don't get me wrong, he's not a foundation guy, but he is a businessman. But he thinks that business can be the solution and not the problem. Also, on 13 February, we've arranged, again thanks to Praya's efforts, another tour, follow-up to we had a green building tour. Was anybody here on the green building tour that we took to green building on Witiyu? No? Well, you missed it. Okay. A couple of us, it was a great opportunity to take advantage of the expertise that we're in touch with to share, in this case, Amory Watergate's activities and greening their own building. The first building we went to was designed green from the ground up. The one on Cornered Wireless and
Park Ventures.
what was the name of it?
Park Ventures.
Park Ventures, yeah.
There's a twist to this one that Brad will elaborate very quickly.
Would you like to describe this a little bit? It'd be good.
Okay, so the reason that you should go see the Amari Watergate Hotel is because the Japanese government spent 120 million baht on upgrading their entire system to make it energy efficient. So it's like a pilot demonstration project to convince the Thai people and companies that it's worth doing, and it's been very successful. Their electric bill is about 3 million baht a month. They have 600 rooms plus conference rooms and everything. I had no idea that it was such a big hotel, but they were chosen because it's a flagship hotel in the middle of Bangkok, in the middle of the shopping area, and now they have a savings of 15%, which comes out to about 500,000 baht per month from this energy efficiency installation upgrade. So it's very highly recommended. That's February 13th. The time is, we meet at the lobby at the hotel at 10:45, and it's only 1 hour. So it'll be very, very quick and very interesting.
When you do the maths on that, it'll take 240 years for them to get the payback on the
Yeah, so the payback thing is an issue that each company has to evaluate on its own. But since this is such a huge hotel, it was funded mainly by the Japanese government, and but there are other things that a lot of other hotels that we know of, for example, the Dusutani, the Banyan Tree hotels, and other chains, they're all doing this. Chivasom in Hua Hin, where there's not a lot of water. So there are these issues all the time, and we like to address them through our green building tours. And we saw that with Park Ventures, that's designed from scratch. But this one, it's a retrofit, so it's quite interesting. So we hope to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. And in response to that comment, I would like to point out that Sony Corporation famously, where companies have 3, 5, 10-year plans, Sony Corporation famously has a 500-year plan. So for them, hey, half the time and we've amortized it, hey, we're doing good. They really do have the long view. And that's what really required, as we all know, to make this work. And look forward to seeing you all again next month. And do keep in touch if you have any suggestions for future meetings. Thank you.